That's Marco D'Amico. Follow him at MN D'Amico. Follow him, and as he covers the Montreal Canadiens on the daily with rg.org. The Montreal Canadiens prospect pool is loaded. It's loaded. Let's talk about that for a second here. Let's talk about the prospect pool as it relates to a couple of NCAA guys first. Let's talk about Jacob Fowler, another phenomenal season. Let's talk about Michael Hage with Michigan, big freshman of the year nominee. What's the future look like for both of those guys? Let's start with Jacob Fowler, Marco.
Well, Jacob Fowler has been very impressive. It's been 2 years now, but I think a lot of people see the Caden Primo effect. When Caden Primo was playing with Northeastern at the time, he was playing on a powerhouse Huskies team with some pretty high-end players, notably, a guy like Jordan Harris, a guy like Jaden Struble, but also some pretty strong NCAA talent at the time, like Madden. Obviously, not all these guys made the NHL, but you thought to yourself, this is a team that played a lot more defensive hockey, protected Caden Primo, and despite that, Primo put excellent numbers. And you could even go as far back as a guy like Zach Fucale with the Halifax Mooseheads, again, playing on a powerhouse team. So those stats, what do you make of it? Well, last year, he had Cutter Gauthier and Will Smith on his roster, on top of, Gabriel Perreault and Ryan Leonard, who's an absolute stud of a player. Now this year, a little less depth, although they do have James Haggins that kind of comes in and he's going to be all, for all intents and purposes, a top 3, top 5 pick at this point. So Boston College has always kind of really been good, but the record indicates that he had as much to do with their victory or their victories this year as any other player on that team. And, as we talk about the potential for the Mike Richter or the top NCAA goalie, like he's definitely, top of the list for me, if not top 2, worst case scenario. So the question is, what does he have left to prove? And so there are people in hockey that are concerned about goaltenders jumping from the NCAA to pro after 2 years. They think they would caution to 3 to really kind of allow them to develop physically and to be ready. But there are other people that think that he'd be wasting his time in the NCAA because what more does he have to prove on an individual perspective? And I could see both ends of this, but the problem with Jacob Fowler, it's not so much a problem with him, it's a problem with the rules. If Jacob Fowler were to turn pro this year, he has 2 options. Either he signs his entry-level contract with the Montreal Canadiens, burns the first year, and finishes the year off in Montreal. But if he does that, he is ineligible to go to the Laval Rocket.
Right. He wasn't on their roster before the deadline.
Correct. However, there is another way, and this is the less sexy way for a NCAA player, especially of his caliber. But he would be able to sign a professional tryout with the Laval Rocket. So same way that Luke Tuck, same way that Jaden Struble has done in the past. And not to get, there are different rules for Canadian players. There are different rules for European players. But as it applies to NCAA players, you would be able to sign a pro tryout to finish the year out with the Laval Rocket and participate in the playoffs. I think it's a foregone conclusion at this point that they'll make the playoffs. And then only have his entry-level contract kick in as of July 1st for the 2025-2026 season. Now, the reason that would make sense for the Canadiens is he would be around the organization for a playoff run, and that would be rather interesting, in the American Hockey League. But from his end, ideally, you would want to burn your entry-level contract first year as quickly as possible, just like Lane Hudson did last year, and just like Sean Farrell did the year prior. So this is the thing with top prospects coming out of the NCAA is that, we saw with Cutter Gauthier, for example, the fact that the Philadelphia Flyers didn't want to do it is what caused the break between the 2 parties in the organization and forced the trade to Anaheim. So there is an expectation among certain NCAA players. However, and this is where I make a giant parenthesis, you cannot underscore how much the Fowler family loves the Montreal Canadiens.
I did not know that.
He is a diehard Canadiens fan. His grandfather married we talked about this earlier in the year when I interviewed him, but his grandfather married a local here. And so his father spent a lot of time in Montreal. And then by default, he and his father spent a lot of time together in Montreal. And the family's elation when they found out that he was drafted by the Montreal Canadiens was just tangible. When I spoke to him about playing for the Montreal Canadiens, obviously, understandably, didn't want to give too much away, but body language is something, and the excitement was measurable in terms of how he can't wait to play for the Canadiens. So I don't think it's going to come down to a question of yes or no. I think it's going to come down to what makes most sense, whether he goes back to the NCAA, whether they try to get him games in the playoffs in Laval. There's also the possibility, we've seen this before in the past, that he could play for the USA at the World Championships, the same way that Trey Augustine, a player that was drafted in the same draft as him with the Detroit Red Wings, did for Team USA last year. There's a very real possibility of that's happened before. Or signs a contract with the Montreal Canadiens. They give him a game to end out the season. But in my honest opinion, bless you, sir, in my honest opinion, the thing to keep into consideration is, unlike last year, the Canadiens are in a playoff chase right now. And I don't know that they're.
But they did it with Lane Hudson, though. He played those 2 games against Detroit. Isn't that
right? But they were not in a playoff hunt.
No,
right?
But
they were fifth.
Why wouldn't they do that with him now?
Because you can't sign the guy and not give him a game. Right?
Well, you put Dobeš back in Laval. You put Dobeš back with the Rocket.
Right.
And let him play. Let him 2 or 3 games with the Canadiens.
You're going to have him ride Pine?
Yes.
Just to be there? No.
Let's see in the last 5 games. Last 5 games. Maybe he plays 2. They're not going to make the playoffs, Marco.
Well, okay. The comment section's about to blow up for you, buddy. But
it's fine.
If they're still in it, 5 to 10 games out of the season, because we don't know what's going to happen with the NCAA tournament.
Right.
If they're still in it, he's not touching that ice. Right. If they're out of it,
that part I get.
The reason, and they don't have to send Dobeš down, for the record. As of the trade deadline, the 23-man roster no longer exists. Right. As long as you can fit them under the cap, you could have 28 players if you want. So that's not necessarily a roster issue. It's more
you want Dobeš
playing issue.
Was my point, I guess. Yeah.
Right. You want him to play. So I can see a guy like him, look at the factors, look at his development, look at the challenge of potentially, like, his hero when growing up was Carey Price, right? So Carey Price, obviously junior players, this is a different story, but Carey Price won a Calder Cup trophy fresh out of junior in a year he wasn't supposed to be playing in the AHL. And so, there's that challenge that could be available to them. It's a different story. Again, Jacob Fowler in and of itself is a case study, because this is going to be very interesting to see what avenue they decide to go down. A guy like Michael Hage, different story.
Hage, so let's talk about him for a second. Like, we're not. I mean, he had a great year, freshman year. I mean, he's gonna go back for another collegiate season, right? We're not talking about Michael Hage turning pro at any point. Yeah, there's no rush
on Hage's side from the conversations that we had earlier this year, and there is no rush on the Canadian side for a couple of reasons. First of all, when it comes to Hage's offensive development, Michigan really wasn't there this year, as opposed to years prior where they've been absolutely stacked in terms of top end talent. But the thing that changes the game for Michigan, and by default Boston University, Boston College, Denver University, is the CHL NCAA ruling that came out in November that allows a lot of these CHL guys to now jump ship without penalty. Because before, you play one game in the CHL or attend one training camp, it was over, right? You couldn't play the NCAA. Now you can do whatever you want. So we're seeing a lot of guys that were committed to the NCAA now playing in juniors, because they're then going to the NCAA next year or the year after. Well, what happens to junior players that are currently ripping it up and are like over 1.5 per game at 18 or 19. And teams have, teams are thinking to themselves, would I rather them, like you look at a player like in the WHL right now, there's Riley Height. There's, right now Berkeley Catton's an exception. But if you look at, other WHL top scorers, they've been demolishing that league for 2 years now.
Right.
You even look at a guy like Gavin McKenna.
Yeah.
Who is going to be the first overall pick by all intents and purposes, you make the call today in 2026. Gavin McKenna, what does he have more to prove in the WHL? He's already over 100 points as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old. But
He's just waiting to turn 18.
But you look at the season and you have a guy like Washington Capitals prospect Andrew Cristal, who has 123 points in 53 games after having very much close to the same outcome last year. Was this right? Did he really get challenged more this year than he did last year? No, but would he in the NCAA? Probably. And so that is, Gavin McKenna, again, we were just talking about 114 points at this time in 53 games. So that's over 2 points per game, 2.15 points per game, again, as a 16, 17-year-old. That's nuts. That's better than his cousin Connor Bedard. So what does he have more to learn in the NCAA?
Mm-hmm.
And you're in the CHL. And you even saw it in the American Development Program. A lot of guys are leaving the U.S. Development Program early to go to the NCAA, like a James Haggins, for example, a Logan Hensler. Like you're seeing that happen much more now than you did before. Before, like even when in the era of Cole Caulfield or Jack Hughes, a lot of these guys stayed there until they got drafted and then went to the NCAA. It's changing because now the NCAA seems to be hat for players that really want to push themselves just because the age gap is significant. Right. You're not playing. It's not 16 to 21-year-olds. It's generally 18 to 24-year-olds, and it's more structured. It's more physical, more along the lines of the NHL game, especially when it gets tighter into the season. So when you look at a guy like Michael Hage, who plays for a team like Michigan, I won't give anything away, but I've heard that Michigan may have a recruit or two that will make people understand why it's best for him to go back.
Right.
And
enough said.
I think
I get it.
I think within that setting, you're going to have Oliver Kapanen probably playing in Laval next year, top end. Owen Beck potentially as well, depending on what they do at center. Again, we talked about this.
Yeah, what the summer
I think it's good for them to have that structured depth and not have to throw someone into a second line center position just because you have nobody else.
Competition, man. Give me competition. Fight for
jobs.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think, with that said, Michael Hage can take his time and then sign at the end of next year. But I think Michigan is going to try to go for it while they have these guys maturing next year. And when it comes to Hage, he didn't really have a significant amount of help. And I think the intrigue is going to be, well, what happens when there's actual secondary scoring on this team, and he's going to be able to distribute the puck and use his teammates more in ways where it would generate points. And I think that's the key. You want him to diversify his offense because right now he's a puck carrying shooter. You want him to be more of a dual threat. I think sending him back to NCAA to work on that is going to be what really helps him.
That's Marco D'Amico, just the best. Love having you're my favorite. You're my best asset, brother. Marco D'Amico at MN D'Amico. Well, you didn't like that? Is that too much?
I know.
Too much?
No. I just don't throw the franchise tag too soon.
No, not the NFL. I don't want a franchise. I want to reward you. I don't want to franchise tag you. I want you to be welcome. I want you to love being here. Marco D'Amico, I love having you. Check him out at MN D'Amico. Follow him on all your favorite socials. Check him out on rg.org. Marco, we'll see you soon. Thanks, brother.
Sounds like a plan.